The shaking lasted only about 45 seconds, but by the time it stopped, on the morning of February 28, 2001, more than 400 people were injured. Buildings across Seattle were cracked and leaning. Brick facades had crumbled into the streets of Pioneer Square, and the ground had done something that should terrify anyone living in the Pacific Northwest. And yet somehow, only one person died. A magnitude 6.8 earthquake had just struck directly beneath one of the largest metropolitan areas in the United States, a region home to nearly 4 million people. And the single reason the death toll was one instead of thousands comes down to one number that most people have never even heard: depth. That earthquake did not come from a shallow crack near the surface. It came from more than 30 miles straight down, roughly 52 kilometers beneath Puget Sound. And it was not the first. In 1965, a magnitude 6.7 struck from about 37 miles down and killed 7. In 1949, a magnitude 6.7, by some estimates as strong as 7.1, ruptured from around 34 miles down and killed 8. 3 major earthquakes under a city of millions across 3 generations, and every single one of them was born deep inside the earth. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern. And that pattern is the reason Seattle is still standing today. So here's what we are going to do. Today we are going to break down exactly what is happening beneath Seattle, where the real danger actually is, and whether the next one could be far worse. No guessing, no dramatizing, just the facts, the science, and the real stakes. Have you ever felt an earthquake in the Pacific Northwest? Drop a comment right now and tell me where you were and what it felt like. And if you want to be the first to know every single time the ground moves, subscribe. It is completely free. A thumbs up also helps enormously, so let us go for 5,000 likes on this one so the algorithm actually shows it to the people who need to see it. Now let us get into it. Let us start with the earthquake most people in the Seattle area still remember. February 28, 2001. It was a Wednesday morning, 10:54 a.m. local time. The workday was in full swing. Kids were in classrooms. Coffee was being poured in the same neighborhoods where some of the biggest companies on Earth are headquartered. And then, without a second of warning, the ground began to move. The epicenter was located about 11 miles northeast of Olympia near the Nisqually River Delta, close to Anderson Island at the southern end of Puget Sound, magnitude 6.8. And the depth, the number that matters more than any other in this entire story, was approximately 52 kilometers, about 32 miles beneath the surface. Now hold that number in your head because it explains everything that happened next. The shaking rolled outward across the Puget Sound lowlands. In downtown Seattle, high-rise towers swayed for close to 45 seconds, a length of time that feels endless when you are living through it. In Pioneer Square, one of the oldest parts of the city, older brick buildings that were never designed to survive a modern earthquake began to shed their facades. Bricks and masonry rained down into the streets. The historic Alaskan Way Viaduct, the elevated double-decker highway carrying tens of thousands of vehicles a day, was damaged badly enough that it would eventually be condemned and torn down. Down in Olympia, the dome of the Washington state capitol was cracked and shifted. At SeaTac Airport, the control tower was evacuated. The total damage climbed into the range of $1 to $4 billion. More than 400 people were hurt. And the number of people killed by a magnitude 6.8 earthquake striking directly beneath a metropolitan region of millions was 1. A single fatality, a woman who suffered a heart attack during the event. Read that again. 1. For an earthquake this powerful, in a city this size, that number is not just lucky, it is almost unbelievable. And it is the whole point of this story. But here is the part that most people never learned. This exact scenario had already played out twice before, within living memory, in the very same region. Go back to April 29th, 1965. A magnitude 6.7 earthquake struck between Seattle and Tacoma. Its depth was roughly 60 kilometers, close to 37 miles down. It killed 7 people, several of them from heart attacks, and caused serious damage across the region. Now go back further to April 13th, 1949. A magnitude 6.7 earthquake, which some early estimates placed as high as 7.1, struck near Olympia from a depth of around 54 kilometers, about 34 miles down. That one killed 8 people, including a child struck by falling debris, and it remains one of the most damaging earthquakes in Washington's recorded history. 3 earthquakes, 1949, 1965, 2001, 3 generations of Pacific Northwesterners, and 1 identical signature. Every one of them detonated tens of miles below the ground, deep inside the earth, far beneath the buildings and the people. To understand why that is happening and why it is the difference between a scary morning and a mass casualty event, we have to go underground. To put 52 kilometers of depth in context, you have to understand what is actually beneath Seattle. Off the coast of the Pacific Northwest, a slab of oceanic crust called the Juan de Fuca plate is being pushed eastward and forced down underneath the North American plate. This process is called subduction, and it is happening at a rate of roughly 3 to 4 centimeters every year, a little over an inch. That does not sound like much, but stretch it across millions of years and you get one of the most significant geological engines on the continent. As that oceanic slab dives beneath North America, it does not simply melt and disappear. It keeps going. It bends downward and descends deeper and deeper into the earth, dragged down by its own weight in a process scientists sometimes call slab pull. And here is where it gets important. As that slab sinks, it is put under enormous stress. It bends. It is squeezed by rising temperature and crushing pressure. Water that was locked inside the rock is cooked out of it, and under that combination of forces deep inside the descending slab, the rock cracks. It ruptures. It releases energy. That is a deep earthquake. Scientists call these intraslab earthquakes or intermediate depth earthquakes because they originate inside the subducting slab itself, tens of miles down, rather than at the shallow surface where people live. That is exactly what happened in 2001, in 1965, and in 1949. Every one of those earthquakes was born inside the Juan de Fuca slab as it bent and broke far below Puget Sound. Now, why does that depth save lives? Think about what the energy has to do. When a fault ruptures 32 miles underground, all of that seismic energy has to travel up through 32 miles of solid rock before it can reach the surface where the buildings are. And every single mile of that journey, the energy spreads out. It weakens. It gets absorbed and scattered by the rock it passes through. By the time it reaches the streets of Seattle, a magnitude 6.8 earthquake has been softened into a long, rolling shake instead of a violent, sharp jolt. Compare that to a shallow earthquake. A shallow quake that ruptures just a few miles below the surface releases its energy right where the buildings are, right where the people are, with almost nothing in between to absorb the blow. Same magnitude, completely different outcome. That is why the earthquake you feel is not just about how much energy is released. It is about how far that energy has to travel to reach you. And in Seattle, for 3 earthquakes in a row, that distance was tens of miles. That is the shield the region has been living behind without most people even realizing it. But here is the problem with relying on a shield you did not build and cannot control. The same ground that produced those deep survivable earthquakes is also capable of producing something else entirely. And it has done it before. The difference between the year 2001 and the year 900 is not luck, it is depth. Because roughly 1,100 years ago, the ground directly beneath what is now Seattle did the exact opposite of what it did in 2001. Running east to west, straight through the modern city, underneath downtown, beneath Bainbridge Island, Mercer Island, and Bellevue, is a shallow crustal fault called the Seattle Fault. It is not tens of miles down inside a sinking slab. It sits in the upper crust, just a few miles beneath the surface, essentially right under the sidewalks, and around the year 900, that fault ruptured. Scientists estimate the earthquake at somewhere around magnitude 7 to 7.5. And because it was shallow, right at the surface, its effects were staggering. On Bainbridge Island, at a spot now known as Restoration Point, a whole shoreline was violently lifted out of the water, hoisted upward by an estimated 7 meters, more than 20 feet, in a matter of seconds. Land that had been beach was suddenly high and dry. The shaking triggered massive landslides. Entire hillsides and the forest growing on them slid down into Lake Washington, where those trees still stand today. Submerged and upright on the lake bed, their wood carbon dated to that same event around the year 900. And the quake did something else Seattle rarely thinks about. It generated a tsunami inside Puget Sound itself. Geologists have found the sand sheets that wave left behind at places like West Point and Cultus Bay, physical proof that a wall of water swept across the inland sea after the ground lurched upward. That was a shallow earthquake. That is what the same region produces when the rupture happens right beneath the surface instead of 30 miles down. These are not just geological events, they are human experiences waiting to happen. So now imagine that year 900 earthquake, but underneath the Seattle of today, underneath nearly 4 million people, underneath skyscrapers, bridges, hospitals, and highways, underneath the elevated structures and the old brick buildings and the fuel storage tanks, a magnitude 7 or greater, shallow, directly below the city with none of that protective 30 miles of rock to soften it. In 2001, from 32 miles down, a magnitude 6.8 killed 1 person. A shallow Seattle Fault earthquake would release its energy at the surface, in the worst possible place exactly where the most people and the most infrastructure are concentrated. That is not fear-mongering. That is the same fault, the same city, the same physics. The only variable that changed is depth, and depth is the one thing nobody gets to choose. So what are scientists actually watching for right now? Let us be clear and responsible about this, because this is where a lot of online content goes off the rails. Scientists cannot predict earthquakes. Nobody can tell you the day, the month, or the year that any of these faults will move. There is no machine, no signal, and no expert on Earth that can give you that. What scientists can do is monitor. The Pacific Northwest Seismic Network keeps instruments running across the region around the clock, tracking every tremor, every deep intraslab rumble, and every shallow crustal creak. And what they are watching is not really the deep earthquakes. The deep ones, as terrifying as they sound, are the ones the region has repeatedly survived. What keeps seismologists up at night are the shallow crustal faults, the ones without the depth buffer. The Seattle Fault is one, but it has company. The Tacoma Fault runs through the South Sound. The South Whidbey Island Fault runs to the north. These are shallow faults capable of large earthquakes close to major population centers. Keep an eye on the ground itself, too. Large parts of Seattle's most valuable and most crowded areas are built on soft artificial fill, land that was created by filling in tidal flats and shorelines over a century ago. Pioneer Square, parts of Sodo Harbor Island, and the Duwamish tide flats sit on exactly this kind of loose, water-saturated ground. And in a strong earthquake, that soft ground can do something called liquefaction, where saturated soil temporarily behaves like a liquid, amplifying the shaking and letting the ground beneath buildings lose its strength. The hardest shaking in a shallow quake would fall on some of the softest, most built-up ground in the city. Then there is the inventory of older buildings. Seattle still contains well over 1,000 unreinforced masonry buildings, the exact type of brick construction that shed its walls in 2001, and the exact type most vulnerable to a shallow rupture. And behind all of it, offshore, sits the third and largest source. The Cascadia Subduction Zone, the giant fault where the whole Juan de Fuca plate meets North America, capable of a magnitude 9, which last ruptured in the year 1700 and averages centuries between events. We have covered Cascadia in depth before, and it deserves its own conversation. But the point today is this: Seattle does not sit above one earthquake threat. It sits above three, stacked at three different depths. The deep intraslab quakes tens of miles down, the shallow crustal faults a few miles down, and the offshore megathrust out beneath the ocean floor. One of those three has been quietly saving the city with distance. The other two have not shown their full hand in a very long time. So let us bring this all the way back and be honest about what the fear actually is and what it is not. When you hear that Seattle's earthquakes are coming from 30 miles down, the instinct is to be frightened by the depth, to imagine some monster stirring far below the city. But the truth is almost the reverse. Those deep earthquakes are the ones the region has survived again and again, precisely because they are so far down. The 30 miles of solid rock between the rupture and the surface is not the threat. It is the shield. It is the reason a magnitude 6.8 in 2001 took one life instead of thousands. The realistic danger to Seattle was never buried 30 miles underground at all. It is hiding just a couple of miles beneath the streets people walk every day, in the shallow faults that run directly under the city, and in the soft, filled ground that so much of the city is built upon. The deep quakes are a warning shot the earth keeps firing from a safe distance. The shallow one is the round that has not been fired in over 1,000 years. Nobody can tell you when that changes, but the region can decide how ready it is when it does, through retrofitted buildings, updated codes, early warning systems like Shake Alert, that can now give people precious seconds before the shaking arrives, and knowing the ground you actually stand on. That is not luck. That is preparation. So I want to hear from you. If you have ever felt the ground move in the Pacific Northwest, drop a comment and tell me exactly where you were and what it felt like. If this gave you real information you did not have before, hit that like button and help us reach 5,000 likes so more people see it, and subscribe so you never miss an update as the science develops. Stay safe out there, everyone watching from Seattle, Tacoma, Olympia, and everywhere the ground has a story to tell. Let us go. See you in the next one. Description. Why do Seattle's most powerful earthquakes keep striking from more than 30 miles beneath the surface, Sprite? And what does that depth actually mean for the millions of people living directly above it? Beneath Puget Sound, the Juan de Fuca plate is being forced down under North America in a process called subduction. As that slab bends and sinks tens of miles into the earth, it cracks and releases energy in what scientists call deep intraslab earthquakes. The magnitude 6.8 Nisqually earthquake of 2001, the 1965 Seattle-Tacoma earthquake, and the 1949 Olympia earthquake all shared the same hidden signature. Each one ruptured 30 to 40 miles underground, and each one caused far fewer deaths than a shallow quake of that size should. In this documentary, we break down the science of why depth softens a quake and why it is only part of the story. Despite dramatic online headlines, scientists cannot predict earthquakes. No one can tell you the day, month, or year any fault will move, and there is currently no scientific evidence that a major rupture is imminent. The recurrence interval of the shallow Seattle fault remains poorly constrained, and the numbers discussed here are estimates drawn from the geologic record, not forecasts. Our goal is to separate what the evidence actually shows from what sensational headlines claim. In this documentary, we'll explore The 2001 Nisqually earthquake and why a magnitude 6.8 under a major city took only one life. The 1949 and 1965 deep earthquakes that share the same depth signature. How subduction and the Juan de Fuca slab produce intraslab quakes tens of miles down. Why 30 miles of solid rock acts as a shield, and why that comfort is deceptive. The shallow Seattle fault, the year 900 rupture, restoration point, and the Puget Sound tsunami. What scientists monitor now, shallow crustal faults, liquefaction zones, and early warning. Join us as we separate scientific evidence from sensational headlines and uncover what is really moving beneath one of America's great cities. Have you ever felt an earthquake in the Pacific Northwest? Tell us where you were and what it felt like in the comments.